Imagine just going to a website and signing up to send your CRM data to another company. That is the most private data that you have. And if buyers are willing to do that, it tells you how much they want to own the journey themselves. And if you keep fighting that, you're going to lose that battle.
Hi, welcome back on Olium. So as usual, I'm with my very good friend Marcus. Marcus, hi.
Hey.
And so today we are quite excited. We have with us Nick Turner. So Nick, you are the CEO of Dreamdata. So hi, Nick. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
And so, so usually we focus on the European market, and I think you will have like a very specific, let's say, angle for us because you are actually based in the US, but working for a Danish company, so Dreamdata, and we can't wait to essentially learn more about what's going on. I mean, you very recently raised like a 55 million round. I think to push more in the US as you and you recently transitioned from like the CRO, so Chief Revenue Officer, to the CEO role. So yeah, I can't wait to understand like the dynamics, etc., in the business and discover a bit more about marketing technology. So really to kickstart the discussion, Nick, do you think you could give us a description of, Dreamdata? I mean, what are you building? Where, for what, for who, in what sort of context? That would be super to essentially start the discussion.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking. So I think, what we do is B2B marketing attribution and activation. And I put that in like really plain terms. We help B2B marketers measure what's working and what's not. And then we help them to actually activate that data and utilize it in their ad platforms, utilize it as leads for sales, and so on. So I would think of us as definitely like a marketing optimization platform for B2B marketers.
Okay, nice. And so maybe about you now. So I mean, you started like your career in construction. You spent some time in the tech space. I mean, how can we essentially link back those not so old days to your current role?
Yeah, you're kind. They are old. It's okay to say that. I grew up. I was born in 1980. I'm not gonna go that far back, but it puts me like teenager when the internet was really becoming a thing. And it was super exciting. I was building websites. I was doing some quote programming in my high school years, and I went to school for computer science. And thereafter, I kind of was taking a break. I was running triathlons. I was kind of trying to be a competitive athlete, though not doing all that well. But I ended up working part-time at a construction company because it gave me time to train for triathlons. And where we ended up was they found out about my background. They asked me if I wanted to be, co-owner with them. So they ran the job sites. I ran the business side. And I ended up actually building a SaaS platform for construction companies while I was there. The idea was most construction companies, this is 2005. So most construction companies are pretty bad at communicating with their customers. So I built a platform for us to do that with our customers. It was a big hit, and that was around, got to be around 2007. And if you know your history, you know what was happening around that time in the construction space. So we had done a lot of work scaling the business, promotion, marketing, getting our name out there, and we had scaled to maybe 5 million annually. And then the bottom just kind of fell out. And so I spent some time kind of shutting down the business, and then I moved to New York and got back to my roots of being in software and technology kind of directly. But that was an incredible experience for me, jumping into a company, becoming a leader of 20, 25 people at the age of 23 or 24, making all the mistakes when I still, let's not play here, like I make a lot of mistakes still, but I made a lot of mistakes back then that I've learned from in terms of management, in terms of building a company, and just learn lessons on, what's important when you're trying to build business.
So what were some of those mistakes, if you don't mind me asking?
I think, there's so many. I think you learn a lot about hiring. who to hire, especially, I mean, it's obviously different in a construction company versus say a software company. You're hiring completely different profiles. And so you learn what to look for, and you learn to pay attention to the details of that when you're in that hiring process. I think that's probably the biggest one I learned. I think you also learn quite a bit around how you treat your customers, and that was a differentiator for us back then. Every business has to think in the same ways. You have what's your positioning, what's your messaging, what is your differentiator to the market. Mine was I was a 24-year-old kid asking people to give me $1 million to build their dream home, and so I'm not kidding. I would in the middle of the summer I'd be decked out in like at least a sport jacket and jeans, and just to make myself look a little bit more professional, a little older. I grew a beard. I still have that beard. And so I was this kid competing with these guys that are 45, 50, like have done this a lot before. And I'm trying to pitch customers to effectively give me a big portion of their life savings, because these are people that were building a retirement home. And so I think I learned a lot about branding, positioning, messaging, and differentiation to make that work for me at that time. And so I think I've carried a lot of those lessons over into what I do today. The other thing that I would say is that I learned quite a bit about how to manage a budget and how to be pragmatic about how you spend. I kind of unlearned those lessons in ZIRP. I think you kind of learn that, oh, well, at that time anyway, you learn that, hey, we spend as much money as we can to get as much growth as we can, growth at all costs. And fortunately, I had that kind of foundational knowledge of what happens when money isn't free anymore, and how you need to treat it today. Since I don't know what 2022, where interest rates are getting higher, we'll see what happens. And it's just not growth at all costs anymore. People care a lot about making sure that you are pragmatic about how you use your cash.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thanks for taking us through that. And just in terms of your role at Dreamdata, digging a little bit into that. So you've described yourself as a steward rather than a founder. So what was the original insight that the founders had in, I think it's like 2018 when you took over, and sort of how was the vision evolved since you've taken the CEO seat?
Definitely. I think so Lars and Ola and Stefan founded the company 2018. Lars and Ola had known each other at Trustpilot. If you know Trustpilot, pretty successful Danish company, public company now. They had leads coming from all over the place. They had product-led growth, they had marketing-led growth, they had sales leads, and they were trying to figure out what's happening. And it's a quintessential story of, product says, well, we contributed $4 million to pipeline. Marketing says we contributed $4 million. Sales says they contributed $5 million, because that's what sales does. They inflate numbers. And then we're at 13 million in pipeline, but actually only 10 million in pipeline was generated. And so there's overlap, there's influence, there's trying to solve that piece of, hey, where is this actually coming from, and who, what channels are working and what are not. Yeah, so that was the spark for them. And so they actually, sorry to wrap that up. They actually built the solution originally at Trustpilot.
Yeah.
And then they exited the business, built Dreamdata to kind of carry that vision forward. And I would honestly say that I don't think the vision has changed a lot. I think if our vision changes, it's due to our customers. So our customers own our roadmap. I should say customers and market own our roadmap. We listen to the market for almost everything that we're doing. What we've heard recently over the last couple of years is that people want to take the measurement that we provide and tell them what's working and what's not, and actually be able to activate that data. As I mentioned, the idea of, it's one thing to measure it, but if it lives in a silo and you're measuring it, you can't really use that measurement data to improve your marketing campaigns or how you're going out and generating pipeline. It's less useful. And so it's much more useful to be able to say, oh, I can see that this ad campaign is working for this ICP or this user persona, so we should push more dollars to that ad campaign, and we allow people to do that. So
and I guess you were the first hire in the US for a Danish company, right? So what was that like? Was there a specific agreement for a trial period that you had with the founders regarding like your transition to the CEO level, or what was it like?
It was the intention was to bring somebody in that could either looking for someone that was going to be a CEO or a CRO to CEO type role. I should say that what Lars did, what the founders did, and still do, is quite incredible. Lars is a product guy at heart. He's also, I think, a mentor to me.
Mm.
super intelligent, just very bright, and knows the market well, knows how to build great product. And so he was also, I think, never really interested. He said, when we looked at around the room and who should be CEO, I had the most gray hair, and therefore I became CEO. And so he was more than thrilled, I think, to get back into what he loved, which was building product.
Mm.
Now I'm pretty boring. I like operational stuff. I've been in go-to-market for 15 years, and I've always sold into marketing teams. I've owned
Mm.
marketing as someone that grew up in sales, and we can talk about that later. And so I have a strong affinity for our users. I care a lot about their success. And I think that and my operational capabilities is what I bring to the table. But it was, of course, as you mentioned, a trial period. Do we have a good year? And then do we, give Nick the opportunity to take the reins? And we were fortunate to have a decent year. A lot of things fell into place for us. And then we made the change in
Okay,
early last.
so essentially, I mean, they realized that none of them would be like the CEO of the company going forward, so they decided to essentially pass like the reins to someone else. But what were they looking for? Like, I mean, I don't know if you were like amongst like the discussion at the time, like in terms of maybe like personality traits, or who were they looking for exactly?
I think the journey, by the way, I've founded a company and failed miserably at it. I am not a early stage company person. Finding product market fit is not my forte. It's just not something that I'm good at. But I have a lot of experience in scaling companies, and I think that's what they were looking for. Of course, they also saw that a lot of their revenue was coming from U.S. companies. By the way, this is the second time I brought a European company over. So I had worked for a French company previously to bring them over to the U.S. It's Botify. They've been wildly successful. They're still successful. And so I kind of could bridge the gap, that large Atlantic Ocean sized gap between the U.S. team and a European team. Not that there are not differences between the Danish and the French. There certainly are.
So be
But
careful.
with maybe another podcast we can talk about that. But I think just the idea of being able to be an ocean apart from the main team and building something that you want to try to create cultural cohesion with, super difficult. I love the challenge. I think you often see the opposite. You see American companies going offshore and trying to dominate markets. I like the idea of helping a European company come over to the U.S. and kick some ass here too. So.
No, good to know. I mean, so but in terms of maybe like mentality and culture. So I mean, we hear a lot about like the differences between the US and Europeans, where you maybe a bit more aggressive, as you said, etc. Europeans maybe a bit spending a bit, maybe sometimes too much time in thinking, etc. How do you reconcile the two? I mean, in terms of for yourself, I mean, how would you define your own style, and how do you essentially connect with right now, like Danish people mostly, and maybe like the French if you want to speak about the French, but how do you reconcile essentially the two approaches, and what's your style? I mean, if you ever thought about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've been called a cowboy a few times, of course. I think it's a favorite term for Europeans, sometimes for Americans, which is fair. I think it's a fair statement. I think that Europeans are very thoughtful. What I've witnessed, just both in terms of working with Europeans and selling to Europeans, I think once a commitment is made, a commitment is made. Americans will definitely make a faster decision, but then they'll also shift gears faster. Now, there are benefits and drawbacks to both styles. I think, for example, I think in engineering and product, I think a European mindset can be very beneficial. Depends on the timing of the market. I do believe in iteration and getting to market fast with product. But I do think a more thoughtful approach, because product is expensive. It takes time to build. And when you're building it, as the company grows, you're looking further and further on the horizon. So this is going to take us 6 months to build. It's going to take us a year to build. If you're a brand new startup, you can go much, much faster. You can also go faster now. I mean, AI is making it a lot easier to build things faster, but I still think you have to be more thoughtful when you're thinking about product and engineering, as opposed to go to market. Go to market is fast. Like, you need to get to market quick. As soon as a product is built, you need to go out and you want to kind of dominate your category with what you feel is the best product in the space. Now, I really believe in the combination of like European engineering and American style go to market can be very powerful. So that's how I would reconcile that. My own personal style. Yeah, I mentioned that I went to school for computer science. So a long time ago, I knew how to program. So I know enough to be dangerous at this point with the engineering team, though I don't stick my nose in there too much. I know that they know what they're doing, but I think that that gives me a good perspective on both kind of having spent 15, 20 years in sales and marketing and go to market, but also having a foundational kind of computer science engineering background. I come from a family of engineers. That gives me a little bit of perspective on both sides of the fence, if you will. And so that's how I would try to delineate that and how my style goes with each, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You mentioned you come from a family of engineers, but I believe you've also mentioned that you have a military background in your family, right? So
Yeah.
in a sense, you've been hardwired for hierarchy, I guess. How does
Yeah.
that match with the slightly flatter structure in Denmark, for example?
Yeah, taking some getting used to. I mean, I think, I'll be honest about that. I think first, I should also say that we have offices in New York and Copenhagen. We're about 60 to 65 people right now. We have 20, I think right around like 27 or 28 nationalities that work for us. So people that came from different countries and moved to New York or moved to Copenhagen. So we are not homogenous. We're very heterogeneous. Our company was purpose built to be diverse in that way. So that is I love that dynamic. It means we have to work hard on collaboration. Getting used to like the flat. I like it because it's direct. And I've also, worked for Israeli companies, French companies, and Danish companies. I think that there is like one thing that I think they all share as a trait is directness. And I think at a startup, there's no time to be political. There's no time to beat around the bush. Like if you've got a problem and you need to solve it, you need to just say it, and we need to solve it and then move on. And so I think that I very much appreciate about the Danish culture. And so what it also means is that the flat hierarchy, when you say flat hierarchy, I think that's a positive cultural thing, because what's happening is anybody at any level in the company can hold anybody else accountable. And I try to drive that. We now do like a monthly all hands as a standard. And I encourage people to ask questions of me, and you can do it both in the meeting directly. You can do it anonymously. Now, my goal is that no one ever does it anonymously. I want them all to have the courage to speak up in the meeting and say, hey, Nick, you did this. That doesn't really match with our style or our values. Like, what do you
What
think
do
about
they
that?
ask generally? What are like the recurring
Yeah.
questions or topics?
So I got to say, there's nothing that's been recurring yet. They've all kind of been ad hoc, like individual, unique. It's been ongoing for 3 to 4 months now. I would say we've probably gotten about a half dozen, maybe 10 questions. Most of them are about transparency. And so when we raised our Series B, we raised it October 7th. We immediately booked a trip for the entire company to go to Lisbon. And so we had 50 people go to Lisbon. And the first sessions that we did were around company values. Now, that it's important to do that because if you want to maintain any kind of resemblance of your previous culture when you're about to hire and double the size of the team, you better decide on what your values were. And we hadn't done that yet. And so that was one thing that we did. We came to the table. The exec team had developed 3 values that we said, we got to have these. But then we told the team, now you've got today to figure out an additional set of 3 values that you want to see as part of the company culture. Ended up giving us 4. So now we have 7. So, and that was totally fine. I think that also, I think the Danish culture impacted that, meaning that we wanted it to be a collaboration as opposed to a mandate from the team. And that is, what I'm trying to say. That's something that I think I continue to work on, is making sure that everything is not in a hierarchy. It is kind of, one of our values is own the outcome. And that just means that, hey, you decide, here's what the company needs to do. You decide how to do it. You decide what resources you need. And then you just got to own the outcome of how you executed on it to make sure that it's effective. And so it gives a lot of autonomy to people to make sure they, that they feel like they can own their job. They can own their work that they've got to do.
Yeah, That's yeah. I mean, you mentioned values there, so I guess it's one thing, talking about values. A lot of companies talk about values, but then often in the leadership team, you might not necessarily see those values always represented. I mean, it's hard to, but how important is it to? You mentioned, arrogance is kind of the enemy of a CEO, right? And how important is it that the leadership team is able to, take on board that feedback and also appreciate that feedback from the team?
It's the most important thing. It's not just from the team; it's from the market, from customers. I think arrogance is a good way to kill the company.
Mm.
You see it come up at any stage of company. It can come up in the form of assumptions. Assumptions is like the most innocent form of arrogance because it doesn't feel, like you're doing anything bad. You didn't take the time to explore what was actually happening, and you assumed something was right and it was wrong. And so I think that arrogance from top to bottom at the company is unacceptable. That is the enemy of our success. So that's, I try to embody that, and I don't always embody it, but I try to. And so I think that we try to make sure everybody sees that coming from the top down.
So how do you define arrogance really? Because when I look around and like those big like tech companies, etc. I mean, I don't want to name names, but sometimes I don't know if but I feel that there is some sort of degree of arrogance in the way they, speak about like their vision, about like the way like they organize things, like manage the companies, how maybe like they would treat partners, etc. I mean, how do you define arrogance? And if you take like examples of like, I don't know, Elon Musk, for example, I mean, for me, he has some sort of a degree of arrogance in some way, which probably serves him well. But how do you define like arrogance in that space?
I think arrogance is holding an opinion in the face of all evidence telling you that it's wrong. I think that's like the worst degree of arrogance, like saying, I'm right, I know I'm right, I don't care what anybody else is saying. Not listening to opinions or advice from others that have been there before, not listening to customers, not listening to your team. That is certainly arrogance. You shouldn't just make an assumption that you're right, no matter what. That to me is like the pinnacle of arrogance. And then there's also the not taking threats seriously. So looking at a competitor, I mean, this is something, I think Satya Nadella said it when I think it was when they were making the investment in OpenAI. He said, he said, I'm going to butcher this, but he said, we made Google come out and dance. Like he felt like they had, maybe Google had, and I'm naming names, maybe you can bleep me out or something. But maybe they had gotten very high on their horse and high up on a pedestal. And he felt like maybe he knocked him down a notch. And what actually happened, I think, is Google responded very well when they started to produce Gemini, and they had an amazing distribution system there to get people utilizing Gemini. And so I think you saw a company maybe having arrogance about their place in the market in search, and then recognizing that maybe we shouldn't have that arrogance and maybe course correcting. And if they hadn't course corrected, if they had ignored it, we don't know how any of this is going to turn out. And I'm not a visionary in AI. So, but I do think it's a really good example of seeing someone that may have had some arrogance and then seeing them recover from it and adjust.
No, makes sense. So, I mean, now, with current, past journey and current role, I mean, it's fair to say that you are like an expert in, B2B sales cycle, etc. And when you look at the data, like across like customers today, I mean, what does it look like realistically, like a B2B sales cycle?
Yeah, I think first I'll say, I know a lot about it. There's so much more that I have to learn. I also would say if I know a lot about one, it's a very specific segment. I am a probably real mid-market enterprise. PLG I've done some of, but in like a mid-market enterprise setting in B2B, and I would define that as like anything over 10,000 ticket size. You are, our customer base right now, we see on average a 211-day cycle. Now, this cycles I've heard 2 years, and then I've heard 30 days, and so there's large variance, but it skews down to that 211-day mark. What's really interesting for me to watch is, as having grown up in sales, is that 20 years ago I owned the conversation. I knew the what to buy, I knew the why to buy it, I knew how to buy it. And if somebody wanted to learn that as a buyer, you had to go to a salesperson. And that's just not the case anymore. And so what we see in our data is that marketing owns 70% of the buyer journey today. It's incredible. Like 70% of what is happening within marketing. And that is, a lot of that's been the internet. That's going to increase, I believe, as people utilize AI more, and that's going to be seen as, AI, GEO, whatever we're calling it, AEO, that's one portion of it. But marketing owns that. Marketing is the team that's being looked to say, hey, how do we increase our influence in these channels? You're not asking a sales team to do it. You're asking a marketing team to do it. And so if marketing is going to own that, that's going to, you're going to see the marketing ownership of the buyer cycle continue to grow. Now you can embrace that or you can fight it. It's very clear over the last 20 years that if you fight it, you will lose. You need to embrace the way that somebody wants to make a purchase, and then just try to do the best you can around channels to make that effective. One other good example of that's happening is around interactive demos. And so it used to be you had to have a salesperson run the demo for you, and now people are demanding the ability to have an interactive demo on the website. We run a trial. We have interactive demos on the website. And I never would have thought, even 5 years ago, that the things that we do could be run as a trial. We have very large companies, 10,000 plus employees, that come and start a free trial on our site. They get a full featured view of what the product does. And what's interesting to me about that, think about what we do. And this is, I don't mean this to be a sales pitch. I just want you to think about the things that we do. We are connecting to your CRM. We're connecting to your marketing automation platform. You're putting a tracking tag on your website. And all those things can happen. I've seen somebody do all of that within half an hour. And now imagine just going to a website and signing up to send your CRM data to another company. That is the most private data that you have. And if buyers are willing to do that, it tells you how much they want to own the journey themselves. And if you keep fighting that, you're going to lose that battle. And so that's what I would encourage teams to think about is don't fight how buyers want to buy. Embrace it, and that's going to be a good way for you to win. But that 5 years ago, you couldn't have seen that. I mean, security concerns, privacy concerns. We've now got frameworks like GDPR, CCPA that gives people confidence to do things like that. You've now got SOC 2, Type 2. You had ISO, of course, but the other thing I think that happened is it got a lot easier to do with the proliferation of APIs and the movement towards open data from other technologies that allows you to push that data. It's the data ownership piece has been really important to this as well, knowing that you own that data and you can use it in any system that you would prefer.
Okay, so you're saying that 5 years ago, essentially, most buyers, didn't necessarily want to have like a interactive demo or do things on their own, but today, it has changed quite a bit, and most want to do
I don't know if they didn't want it, they weren't getting it. Not as much as they are today. I can't speak to if they wanted it or not. It depends on your buyer as well. Some people want to have a salesperson to guide through the process. I think if you're talking about $1 million ticket, you're going to be talking to a salesperson much sooner. If you're talking about like a $10,000, $15,000 ticket, you might not need sales involved at all. There are certainly some companies selling packages at that rate without an actual salesperson being involved today, and that may continue to proliferate, and you'll see it. I think get larger and larger, the things that people are willing to buy without the interaction of a person. I do think, again, I've got a salesperson at heart. Maybe people like to buy from people, and there's always going to be some sort of threshold that they say, I really want to talk to somebody at the company because you're building trust with the people there before I make this purchase. But that's that will change over time.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, given that like most of the sort of sales process is now heavily on the marketing side of things, do you expect or do you see like maybe remunerations like changing within a company? Like, so up to now, we would have thought that, salespeople were like the rock star, like the ones like scoring goals, essentially. So they were like the one maybe paid more, heavy on the variable compensation, etc. Do you see that it's essentially changing a bit?
I have not seen it change. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong. I can say what the market is saying, and the market is saying that's not really changing. Yeah, that's about as far as I can go on that front. All I can say is, I can observe what people are asking for and what,
Maybe as
what's
a good example,
yeah.
taking Dreamdata and how you organize. Like, I mean, you have yourself like a marketing team, I'm sure, and you have yourself like a sales
Mhm.
team. How do they work together, given that you have all, this data? Like, have you changed like how
Yeah.
remuneration work?
Well, again, not meant to be any kind of sales pitch, but Dream Data is center to what we do, and so we utilize. First off, we have significant inbound. Part of the way that we decide to go to market, like I was talking about, we give people the autonomy to try the product on their own before they have to buy, and so we have a lot of inbound. Obviously, outbound can be. We're working on building an outbound machine as well. But we're actually, before we go there, we really think about something that we call, and I don't think we made this up, but allbound, which is we take marketing signals and then we reach out when we think it's time. I want to say take that with a grain of salt, because what a lot of people call a signal isn't necessarily a buying signal. And the problem that I see happening with signals, that I think there's a lot of discussion around this right now. People are taking things that they see as a buying signal that aren't actually signals, and they are trying to pull in a buyer into a sales journey before they're ready to be in that sales journey. And all you're going to do is annoy somebody. And so you have to be careful what you think of as a signal and how you act on it before you start to annoy your buyers. So, but at any rate, Dream Data, we dog food. We've been using that word a lot lately. We use the platform up and down the entire business from that first marketing touch point all the way through to when I report to our board. We're utilizing Dream data for how we run the business and run our go-to-market.
Sorry, I was just jumping in because it's really interesting what you said there before to try to avoid annoying buyers if there isn't a real signal there. But then I've read a stat somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but it was something around, most buyers engage after like the seventh chaser or something like that. It was a stat like that.
Yeah.
Do you believe
that has been around for a while? I think I remember the seventh touch. I think if you looked at our platform, you would see it's like the 100th touch or something like that.
Yeah.
Based on all the marketing impressions, brand impressions that you get, it's a significantly high amount. Again, that 70% owned by marketing before. And when I say owned by marketing, what I really mean is sales isn't involved until what's the math there? 150th day. So you have that first impression 150 days later, and SQL is, which most commonly is opportunity created in the CRM. And that's when the salesperson actually gets involved. That's not to say marketing's not involved in that. We have campaigns that we run to people that are in our pipeline as well. And then marketing is also involved post sale, meaning, you want to run kind of land and expand type motions where you're expanding the contract size with your customers.
And just, linked to that sort of, do you have a specific sort of sales playbook that you use, maybe like specific, what are like the top 3 rules that you would live by?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, actually, just talking to this with Lewis about this yesterday, kind of what's the framework that we use. And I think it changes all the time. When you change your ICP, then your sales framework has to change. When you change your user persona, then your framework has to change. When you change your product, it has to change as well. I mean, I think to me, even though I've said I grew up in sales a lot, I've never ever thought of myself as a salesperson, meaning that I always just try to solve the customer's problem. If we can solve it, that's great. And if we can't, then that's also fine. And maybe someday we'll solve your problem, and I hope I can meet you again soon. And so I think that we want to be problem solvers first and foremost. And what that really means is when we hire a salesperson, we want curiosity. We want to know that you're genuinely interested in your customer's business and how it operates and how we might be able to help you solve the problems you have today. So part of this is the way you run a sales team, but part of it is also how you recruit a sales team. And so we want curiosity, empathy. We also want people that are competitive. They have to want to win, of course. But in terms of a framework, I think MEDPIC is obviously a very popular one. The basics and fundamentals of sales are the things I've mentioned, but also just how do you drive a deal forward? If you're not able to drive a deal forward as a salesperson, what value are you providing in that process? That's the question that you should ask yourself. And so that comes from simple things around doing great discovery, asking for a next meeting. I know that sounds very basic, but you'd be surprised the number of salespeople that don't do that. And then just making sure that you are actually proposing something that solves the problem, so that the customer sees that it makes sense to move forward. So kind of basic stuff I hesitate to give, because the variation in what you should do from business to business is actually quite broad. So I'm not a fan of things like on LinkedIn, say, oh, comment GTM and I'll send you the perfect GTM framework. Like, come on, man. Like, that is not how it works. Those things, that type of advice, I'm not a big fan of. You lead people down the wrong road, and they could have a product that's great for SMB, but they're looking at a go-to-market framework that's for enterprise, and they're trying to implement this very complex sales process for a customer that doesn't even want to talk to your salesperson. They just want to click free trial and then buy that $30 a month package or whatever it is, and move forward. So that's why I hesitate on advice for go-to-market, because I think everybody's problems are different. So even though we're genuinely solving the same thing, still nuance for everything. So
but it's interesting that you mentioned, this focus on solving a problem rather than necessarily just sort of selling for the sake of selling, which is really interesting, because ultimately, if you do solve a problem, you are providing value. Could you apply that? I mean, just jumping to the marketing side, which, I guess sales and marketing are always working together. How would you say like a marketing leader can like effectively prove their long-term value in terms of the work and like and achieve that final conversion? So you've already mentioned, your playbook or top 3 rules for sales, but what would you say for marketing?
Yeah, that is so hard, and that's like a loaded question.
Sorry.
Because there's no, it's okay. It's okay. There's so much pressure
You
on
have
everybody.
1 hour.
There's so much pressure on everyone today to produce. One of our ICPs, of course, is software. Software is being disrupted. At the same time, go-to-market's being disrupted by AI. So they're both being disrupted by AI. So we got like a double whammy. So the marketers that we work with at SaaS companies or software companies, they've got challenges, and I think that what I think you have to be able to do is communicate well to your other stakeholders. That's the biggest challenge I see, is being able to speak finance, being able to speak CEO, being able to speak CRO. Setting expectations is truly important. At the end of the day, and I know this is a statement that a lot of people may not like, but at the end of the day, every business is about generating revenue, and you have to show how are you impacting that revenue. And so if a marketer can do that and do it in a reliable, consistent, convincing way, then you can clearly, you've helped your longevity at that company. Now, having said that, like, CMOs have the shortest stay of anybody on the exec team, and that really bothers me. I think if we had like a North Star, if I could use a North Star metric, which I know this is very hard to do, it would be what's the longevity of the CMOs that utilize Dreamdata, and I would like to see that be much higher than those that aren't using it. I want everyone to have don't get me wrong, I want everyone to have a job for a long time. But if that's one really great way to be able to show value to the people that are utilizing your product, and that is being able to say, we're going to help you produce what you need to produce for your company, and then also allow you to prove it. Now, on the flip side of that, it takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of work from boards, from CEOs, from CFOs to understand, like, you cannot you can't take away budget and increase targets, for example. Like, that's the worst behavior you could ever do.
Yeah.
And everyone in every company, private, public, is almost all driven by quarterly numbers. And what was the average buying journey that I said earlier? 211 days. Yeah, I'm pretty sure in Europe and America, the length of a quarter is the same, 90 days, right? Yeah. So
Yes,
90
the
days.
same.
There's no conversion rate to be done. Every quarter is the same for everybody. And that means that if the average buying journey is 211 days, then when a marketer first starts marketing towards an account, they're not going to produce pipeline that's going to close in that quarter. And so both CROs, CEOs, boards need to take a longer view on how pipeline is generated. And there are a lot of great ones, but there are some that kind of pull down the overall sentiment on those relationships between CMOs and CEOs and boards and everything. So, but there's work to be done on both sides. Being able to speak finance as a marketer, and then as a finance person, recognizing, hey, I understand we got to spend money this quarter to make money next quarter. Again, most people do, but some don't, and it doesn't convert at a rate that you want. Some of that is market dynamics. Some of that is marketing. but also some of it is product, some of it is sales, some of it is the cash that you're giving people to do their jobs. So there's all kinds of elements of the business that you have to look at when you're making a decision as to, hey, is this a we're not marketing in the right way problem, or is it a product problem? You can't just evaluate it and say, well, we're going to cut all the marketing budget because marketing is clearly not working. Well, honestly, it might be the product that's not working.
Okay, and so is it what you do at Dreamdata? Then you don't track on a quarterly basis, but more on a longer term basis?
Yeah. So when we look at the pipeline that needs to be generated in a quarter, we're looking at that pipeline in relation to the revenue goals that we have in the next quarter. And that suits our sales cycle pretty well. That changes, of course, given the ICP that you're targeting. But for us, that's how we think about it. We think about, look, we know we need to generate this pipeline in Q1 to hit our targets in Q2 and Q3 and beyond. And I think a lot of people are doing it that way, but that's one area where I think we've been able to be mature about it and recognize that not everything we generate this quarter is going to impact this quarter.
Okay. So you mentioned for AI a couple of times. I mean, like now, I mean, AI days, how much is, of the sort of sales process and marketing process can be really automated by AI and by agents, etc., and what needs to, be handled by a human being, maybe, like with all the hype, etc., we feel that, everything can be automated at some point. I mean, where do you really AI?
Yeah, it depends on who you're talking about. So in marketing has permission to automate communications with customers. They just do. You see it. And over the last 10 years, you can see that they've gotten really good at optimizing their dollars. So email communications that marketers send, all automated. You could look at content marketing, kind of an automated, where it's being generated and utilized to communicate to customers in the market. So there's a lot of permission to automate communication on the marketing side. I would argue there's very little permission to automate communication on the sales side. And if you look at, 10 years ago, I'm getting the numbers wrong, I'm sure, but 10, 15 years ago, when platforms like SalesLoft, Outreach came out, great platforms, but I think that it flooded the market with a bunch of automated communication. And I think what the signal to me was that when you're talking to sales, you're expecting to talk to a person. And when you're with marketing, you kind of understand this is a one-to-many communication. Whereas with sales, you kind of expect it to be a one-to-one, but call it a buyer group, whatever you want to do, but 1 to 5 or 6 communication when you're in a sales process. Buyers just don't like that. And so they don't like the automation or what I think right now is being thrown around. They call it AI slop, I think is the technical term for it. But that is that's the line that I would draw. Now, there's lots of things that we do internally that other companies can do to help automate the work of the sales team. But when it comes to communicating with the customer, I still feel very strongly that communication should be done as a human being, writing an email to somebody or sending a LinkedIn message, whatever it may be, trying to really target the right people and send a personal message.
Okay. And so within the product of Dreamdata, how much AI do you leverage really across the board?
Yep. So there's probably 3 ways. There's the old school AI that you might think of like machine learning. And that's what's most useful when you're thinking about complex numbers and doing complex math. Generative AI, not so great when doing calculations with lots of math and data points, but it can be great to interact with as a UI layer, as long as you've got a strong data set underneath it. And that's where you kind of see a lot of AI agents failing, where there's not a good data model underlying it. There's a study done last summer, and that in AI world is like 10 years ago, but there was a study done around how agents are failing, and I'm not going to name the company, but they were failing at a 40 to 70% rate. And that's not software, that's a roulette table. And so I think, if you're going to be making decisions on how you spend money, you've got to make sure that the underlying data model is super strong. And so we we try to solve for 2 problems, one of which is, of course, hallucinations. How do you build a data model that eliminates or reduces hallucinations down to very small fraction? But then there's the other problem that you have where users still aren't very good interacting with an AI agent. and asking a question where we call it kind of wrong question, correct answer. So you ask a question, let's say, for example, it's January 3rd, and I ask, hey, how many MQLs did we produce this year? And the answer is none, because January 3rd was still, still the weekend this year. And so what you really meant to ask was, how many MQLs did I produce last year? Because you still thought it was 2025 year. That's a very simple example, but those are the kind of things that you want to avoid. And so we utilize AI generated summaries in our platform.
Mm-hmm.
We utilize AI generated signals. And what that does, it's a combination of machine learning type style AI with generative AI. So we're basically looking at what are the signals that are showing they produced the best quality SQL or have the best chance to lead to a closed won deal. And that's done through a machine learning AI. And then, of course, so we generate the descriptions and how you should utilize that signal through our AI signals.
Okay, maybe moving on to market dynamics. I mean, what's pushing really your market forward? Like maybe if we think macro trends at work, I mean, what's pushing the business forward? I mean, I'm not never worked really in that space, but I mean, I've read about sort of regulations around cookies, Apple, keeping the data, etc. So, I mean, this I would imagine are more sort of challenges for the product, etc. But, I mean, where do you see the big market trends pushing you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that honestly that comes up some, but it's not the thing that I think we talk about the most. On that front, though, I think where we really focus on attribution, especially in the B2B space, is we think mostly around account-based attribution, because it can be difficult to track down to a contact level with remote work, with cookies. There's no way to do it and actually be really privacy compliant if that is important to you. So we look a lot at IP to company resolution, and we feel we've got the best database in the industry to be able to do that, to get more attribution down to a specific account level. As long as you've got it at the account level, you're not really, with buyer groups, especially with the way that our product and most of our customers' products are, you're not selling to one person, you're selling to a company. And then you're going to have 5 or 6 people at that company that are exploring it. And you do, of course, want to be able to get down to the contact level, and you certainly can. But what's really important is getting to an account level and saying, hey, this is the company that's looking at purchasing from you. What I think is moving us forward is certainly the AI agent conversation. What can an AI agent do to supplement the work of a marketer as an analyst, as actually making decisions around where to spend money in campaigns? So there's a conversation to be had around how much we trust this. I think you've seen a lot of analytics type agents come out where they're focusing on answering questions to you, as opposed to focusing on actually performing a task where it notices, hey, this campaign on LinkedIn is performing very well. You're spending $10,000 on this campaign in Google, so I'm just going to shift that budget over to the LinkedIn campaign. Now, I'm curious, is that something that you would allow the agent to do without talking to you first?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a rhetorical question, but if you might hesitate. Now, if you're asking the question, we're just answering you and giving you data back. Okay, you probably feel much more comfortable with that. But if you then say, okay, based on that response, go ahead and shift that $25,000 or $15,000 over to the other campaign. How comfortable as a marketer are you to do that? And so I think that's in 2 to 3 years, we think people will be much more comfortable doing that. But as of today, I'm not sure what the comfort level is for that to just happen. So there's the typical idea of kind of human in the loop, having somebody that is actually approving it. And you can also think about it as like an expense level or something like that, where, okay, you can make decisions that will cost us up to $500, but that's it. If you're going to do any other decisions besides that, then you've got to come to me, and I've got to click approve, and then you can make it happen. And so the agent discussion is certainly really important. And what levers are you willing to allow it to push and pull without talking to you first? Which sounds kind of a funny way to anthropomorphize. It's not a talking to you, as it were, but just kind of telling you what should happen, and then you give it feedback on what to happen. So
Understood.
Yeah, super interesting. Maybe moving a little bit to the fundraising side, because congrats on your 55 million Series V. So yeah, congrats on that. That's a really, really great result. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that process and how that went?
Yeah, happy to. And thank you. I think, it took a lot of support from the team, from the board to make that happen. So it was a team effort for sure. So how did that come together? I think, it was basically, we decided to go to market in like a May, June timeframe last year. And I spoke to 73 investors, something like that. And, all you need is one. And, we were fortunate to find the one and move forward with Beakspan, who's are incredible partners, by the way.
Mm.
They're an outlier in VC, I would say. But we looked at both traditional VC, growth equity. There's a spectrum, of course, in terms of like expectations. I don't know if you can, what I've said on the call a few times, like I'm a very pragmatic person. So when I look at expectations, that's really important to me. Like, what are you expecting us to do next year with the cash, and what's your expected outcome from us? So that was really important to me when I was making a decision. You don't want to be put in a position where there are unrealistic goals where you don't have control over it, and it could be you don't have control over what's happening market dynamics right now, or what's happening in your category right now. There are certain things where you just don't have control over it, and if someone has an expectation that you can do this, but there are things you can't control, there's a real problem. So I was very careful thinking about what are the expectations of the investors that we're talking to, what outcome do they want to see in the next 3 years, and do I think that's possible? So I think that's one thing that I don't know if people really think about. I think I get that from my years as a CRO and and joining companies that had just raised a Series A or a Series B, and there's something that happens that you're not privy to. There is the fundraising exercise where the CEO or the founding team goes out and to raise money. They make promises in that fundraise, and then as a sales leader or marketing leader, you're then brought in and told the bad news. So by the way, we had promised this back then. And you're like, oh, well, that is actually impossible. And I'm not really sure how we're going to accomplish that. So you really shouldn't have done that. And so I think, those are that's the kind of thing that I wanted to guard against for the future people that we're going to hire, not to put them in a position where we had unreasonable expectations as to what could happen, in particular when there are a lot of things out of your control.
And so what was maybe different in terms of what the investors were expecting this time around versus previous, I guess the growth at all costs era?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on retention. I think there's a lot of focus on still growth rates. I mean, growth rates people want to see for sure. A lot of focus on burn. How are you burning your cash? Where are you spending it? Can you get to a point where you're efficient? Unit economics, kind of those standard things. Quite different from even 5 years ago, where everyone was getting kind of a blank check to do whatever they needed to build a business.
So didn't you think that you went onto the market a bit too late? Maybe like a few months earlier would have been more and easier.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's a question for Lars. I mean, they raised their Series A in late 22, I think, is when we got our Series A. So certainly, but you know what? You can't. You can try to time the market. It's very hard to do that. You go out when you feel it's right to do so. So.
It's impossible to time it perfectly, except now when we are looking backwards, it's very, very easy, obviously. So you mentioned expectations. I mean, what are they expecting from you and the team? If you could give us the highlights. I mean, you mentioned growth, but what sort of growth are we talking?
Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, without revealing too much, I should keep confidential, of course. I think everyone wants to see good growth rate. A company of our size, you're starting to get a handle on what retention looks like and how to get to world class. And so world class retention is 90% plus, and that's the metric that I think you want to hit. That everybody wants to see you hitting. Now, the chosen. I think the chosen ICP has more impact on your retention than anything else you can do. And so if you're in an SMB segment, you should just expect lower retention. If you're in a mid-market segment, you're going to expect a bit higher. And then enterprise, you should expect, 95% plus. Like that's what you want to get to in each of those segments. And then of course you have a mix of that, and then you end up in like that 90% plus range of where you want to be. That's that's how I think about like the retention metrics. Growth rates depends on your size. I think growth rates of a company of our size of X shouldn't be unrealistic. But then there's also outliers that you look
So
at,
it's
like
2x,
Lovable.
it's 2x per year, or it's 2x over the next.
2x per year, but then you generally will see it kind of decrease. That's just as you get bigger, it's harder to 2x. That just happened. But then of course you have outliers today, where I think if you look at Lovable and a few others where the growth is astronomical, and then you have to decide, well, what's the retention on that front? How do we actually are they get the retention will eventually show up on things like that. And if you grow that quickly, there may not be a large focus on an ICP or user persona. You're getting a ton of people in market. And that's also what's happened with AI. The typical rule of thumb is not 5% of your market is actually in market to purchase. But right now, everybody's in market to purchase AI. And so that's why you get those absolutely crazy growth rates that you see today.
Oh, interesting.
So.
Oh, makes sense. And so the 55 million, I mean, it sounds like, for people like me, it sounds like a lot of money. So, I mean, what are you going to spend that on, really?
I guess we're gonna spend it very carefully first. I think when we went out, you always want to raise money that can take you to your goal to get to either. I try to think of it as you obviously want to you'll be on a path where you can either get to your next funding round or you're on a path to get to profitability. We certainly won't spend $55 million this year. That's not going to happen. And we certainly won't spend it within 2 years. And so we raised for the long term to make sure that we had healthy runway and we could eventually control our own destiny if we needed to.
So essentially be able to decide whether or not you want to be profitable or if you want to raise more.
That's correct. Yeah, I think you have to make a decision maybe at every round. And by the way, I should just say the first round that I've led, like at a company, like going out and leading the charge to get the round. I've participated in other funding rounds, but this is the first one where I've really led it. And I think that so you definitely want to make sure that you're in a position to control your own destiny by the time that cash runs out. So that's something that we wanted to accomplish. So
does it work well with the investors? I mean, I guess they are on the same page, if I would imagine. But
yeah, generally speaking, I guess the thing I didn't say there was like really you want to be able to assess in that time frame, are the growth rates at a point where we say, hey, we should reinvest more money and we should refuel the engine, or are the growth rates backing up and you'd be more pragmatic, say, okay, growth is slowing down. You then think about profitability. Now, by the way, in today's world, you're also very much looking at both those things at the same time. And it used to be just growth. Don't worry about profitability. Don't worry about margins. Just grow. And now it is very much, how do you balance both those things at the same time? Grow responsibly while you're in this market.
So looking forward over the next 18 months, so what do those look like for you? And are you launching new features? Are you gonna? I mean, you've just raised the round, so hopefully you're not gonna have to raise again in the next 12 to 18 months.
No,
but yeah, what does the future look like?
Yeah, I should say. I mean, I love our investors. I love the support they give us. But if I had to choose where to spend my time, it would be with the team and with our customers. And so I always want to stress a lot of time focus there. So hopefully, I'm not on the market in the next 12 months, no. But I think that, where we're investing the dollars, certainly growth in the US, but growth in Europe too. We'll actually hire more people in Europe than we'll hire in the US. So we have our product and our engineering team in Copenhagen. We are investing heavily in product right now. It's an exciting time to be building. So we're really excited about a few releases we have coming up this year. That's a key part of our investment. I know sounds pretty vague, but there are really only a few places you can invest, and that is either in your growth or in your product. And those are the two core fuels of a software company. But that is where we're focusing it, enabling us to kind of really, take advantage of the market today in terms of what AI is enabling companies to do.
So tech product, a lot of recruitment in Europe, and so commercially speaking, if you will have like a massive push to the US. I mean, do you think you somewhat own a bit like the European market, or is it going to be 50-50 or?
Yeah, I think if you ever think you own something, somebody's going to go out there and prove you wrong.
Yeah,
So,
arrogance.
so I'm not going to. Yeah, we don't. I don't know if we own the European market. It is a strong market for us, just like the U.S. is a strong market for us. And so we're going to continue to be the underdogs and say, hey, this is our. We need to fight to continue to have strong markets in the U.S. and Europe. But we definitely see a lot of opportunity in the U.S. And Europe. We'll probably focus there for the time being, just
Mm-hmm.
because that's where our team is focused. But there's also opportunities in APAC that we sometimes, we'll turn down sometimes, just depending on what the opportunity looks like. So
Okay, makes sense. And so when looking at, I mean, from a European standpoint, I mean, when you read things, etc., I mean, they always say Europe is super fragmented, the US is just one big market. Is it really the way you look at it once, I mean, being like, like based in the US, from the US, is it really like one big single market, or even when you're there, I mean, you need to think about, northeast versus northwest versus the middle. Is it really one
yeah,
single market?
I would say it really is. Like I would say that, when I think about the European market, when I'm thinking about the teams there and where we focus, I think a lot about which countries we're focusing on. There's enough differentiation, even though it is all the EU, there's enough differentiation there to where we have to think about how are we going to approach that market. French markets, for example, can be pretty insular. They love to buy from French companies. German markets can be the same. And so I think that you have to, I take that into consideration, and you have the different regions, the Nordics, Benelux, UK, France, southern Europe, and then you're seeing kind of more happen in kind of Eastern Europe. But all of those, I think of those as really kind of can be distinct markets, and how you sell into them there can be a good variation. If I think about selling to somebody in California versus
Mm,
someone in Florida or someone in Illinois, there's not a whole lot of a change that I think about needing to make. Yeah, the one thing that I would just say is that can depend on your ICP. So, for example, if you sell into software, you know that a lot of your business is going to be in California because that's where all the software companies are. You're seeing some more. You're seeing it happen in Utah. You have what they call the Silicon Slopes. You see some more happening in Texas with Austin becoming a bigger market. And then, of course, there's Boston in the Northeast where you see a lot of software companies. But I would say it really depends on your ICP, and that can determine where you focus your marketing dollars in the US, just the
okay.
regional aspects of where certain verticals are located. But how you sell to them doesn't change all that much.
Okay. And so would you say it's easier to sell in the US than in Europe then? Because like another like thing like we see from Europe, I mean, everybody seems to say the Americans, they have an easy time because they have that market, etc. So for me, like reading this, hearing this, I have the feeling that, okay, if I set up a company in the US, it will explode. People will be flocking to my doors, like to buy my things. I mean, if there is some form of product market fit, obviously, but is it really easier to create things in the US?
That's a that's a really good question. I think that I like the idea of proving it out in a market that's a little smaller, saying, hey, I've got product market fit here. And so then can I expand that elsewhere? If you come into the US, it's kind of like you might be trying to boil the ocean, and there's so much that you could do. So focus is really important to me. So I think that if you're in Europe, before you decide to make the jump to the US or to any other market, make sure you've got success in that smaller market. It's just like an ICP. Like start with a small ICP and then grow it larger. Obviously geography is a component of ICP often, but that's how I would think about it. Yes, there's certainly, it can be easier to sell here, but it's also easier for everyone else to sell here too. And
True.
so that means that you're going to have a lot more competition to sell here. So there's nothing special about how easy it is to sell for you. It is
Mm.
easy for everybody. So think
Mm.
about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not just yeah, I guess how easy it is. It's also the amount of competition. Another thing you share quite a lot is you share that you make 10 mistakes a day
Oh yeah.
to normalize failure for your kids and for your team. So, have you got an example of a mistake that you've recently made that then led to a better strategic pivot?
Yeah, I meant to think of one. I mean, I try to, how you recover from a mistake is more important than how you recover from anything else, like how you deal with them. So yes, I do make a lot of mistakes. I think that, let me think of a good example of something I've done recently that's been not disastrous, but, not.
I mean, it could be at work or
Yeah.
even in personal life or wherever, family. It's anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a mistake to tell my son that, because then, he, yeah. He gets frustrated like me. Like, he has things that he's really good at. And then, so therefore, whenever he tries something new, he thinks he should be really good at that too. But that's an arrogance, like, can't have that. So, just try to make him feel better. Like I said, look, I make a ton of mistakes. And then, of course, for 6 months after that, he asked me, "What mistakes did you make today, Daddy?"
Yeah.
You could call it like a good therapeutic, maybe, or like a way of journaling for me, so I don't make those same mistakes again. But I think that's yeah, that was probably, even though it was a lot of fun to hear him ask me that and to be able to share it with him. Yeah.
So don't share too much of your knowledge. That's the lesson.
Oh no, yeah. Well, I think I guess it was just kind of funny about it. It was a good way for him to catch me off guard at night when I thought everything was done. I get this really hard question from my biggest critic.
Yeah.
In terms of what did I do wrong, what did I do right that day. So.
Great. Maybe one last question, and to essentially end our chat. Who would you recommend us to have on the show? Maybe one or two persons, and why? And don't
Good
say
question.
like a super celebrity we can't get
No.
to, except if you know him. I mean, if you tell us Jay-Z and you know Jay-Z, happy to.
I don't know anybody famous. I don't know anybody famous. Let's see. I'm sorry, guys. I meant to have something ready for this, but then I got caught up this morning.
Yeah, no worries.
Let me think of who to have. I mean, you guys are focused on Europe, right? I think
Or it could be someone with an interesting point of view on the European market based in the
Dave
US.
Kellogg. Dave Kellogg would be very good. He's worked for a French company, actually. He's been a CEO. He's an ex-CMO turned CEO. That's probably someone that I think would be super interesting to have on the show. Actually, Dave is kind of famous, and so maybe he's famous in my world anyway. So I don't know if you've heard of him, but he would be super interesting to bring on. I think actually Adrian Menard, who founded Botify, I don't know if you know him or not, but he moved. He did something different. He moved to the U.S. to take Botify over to U.S. So he hired an account executive. He moved to the U.S. and then they hired me shortly thereafter to kind of run the go to market, and that is an interesting experience. You get from me kind of the American working for a European company, and you get with him like the European CEO moving to the US. I think he lived there for 7 to 8 years while we were growing the business in the US. And they made the commitment to do that. He brought his family, he brought his children. I think he had a kid while he was there. And so he was immersed significantly. Now, immersed in New York, New York is not the rest of the country, but it's quite different. But that's an excellent experience to hear from for European founders, to know what it's like to either kind of hire someone to run the market for you or to move yourself to the market. The challenge, like, I think that Europeans have is that obviously from a software perspective, San Francisco is where a lot of people see that's where it's at. But the time zone difference there for France is 9 hours. So it's very hard if you're it's hard to hire someone in San Francisco to help you run the US. I think it's even harder if you were to move to San Francisco. And so I think you have to look at getting on shore here in New York or Boston or something like that as a founder. Anyway, Adrian can walk you through the decisions that he made and how he came to that conclusion. But
Super.
yeah,
But no, thank you very much. Nick, super interesting insights, and we were super happy to learn a bit more on your perspective, Europe versus US, and how you see the sales processes, etc. I mean, I guess selling things is very interesting for many businesses, if not all. No, thank you very much for your time. It was really a pleasure. And so on that note, thanks. And then I hope maybe we'll expand to the US and we'll have you one more time for another themed episode.
Join us, visit us in New York, and we'll be happy to have you, and we'll do it again.
Super, fantastic. Will do. Thanks.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Cheers, Nick.